So, I'll start now. I'll read each sentence. In fact, these higher truths can only be helpful because they are true to experience and can be lived on a higher and vaster plane of consciousness and being. Okay? So, what he means is that the laws that operate at the physical level are not valid at the vital level, nor are they valid at the mental level, nor are they valid at the spiritual level. There is a chapter in the Synthesis where Sri Ranga talks about the standards of conduct. Okay, so he has given basically 4 standards. We can have many more standards also, but the first standard is for the individual. He has the right to develop himself, and that's why the ego is valid. Okay, so that's the first. The individual egoistic behavior is justified at the lowest level. Then, when you come to the social standard, so obviously the society cannot allow the individual to go on doing whatever he wants, because that will harm the others. So therefore society steps in and says there are certain laws that must be maintained by everybody, all individuals. So his total freedom is clipped and it is controlled and it is reduced. A man can't do anything he wants. He can't kill somebody else. He can't go through a red traffic light. Okay? So these are all social laws. So society laws are not valid at the moral level, at the higher level, but they clamp down on the individual. Okay? So the standards of conduct there are 4. First is the individual ego, where it is valid. Then there is a social standard. Then there is a moral standard. Social standard also, society can't impose anything on anybody. There are certain laws that operate, okay? You can't, which the human mind imposes on society and others. There is a morality. And the last is the spiritual plane of consciousness. The spiritual behavior has nothing to do with morality. Morality is something superior to social law. Social law is something very easy. Okay? It lays down certain rules for the individuals to follow. There is nothing moral about it. When you say that you can't disturb your neighbor at midnight, it is nothing moral or spiritual. It is just an arrangement of social convenience. So, these are the 4 standards of conduct. This is what is being discussed here, that when you go to this spiritual plane of consciousness, you see that morality does not apply. So that does not mean to say that at our level, the criminal can do whatever he wants. Okay? He can claim, that's what Sri will tell you later on, he can claim that I am not responsible for my actions. Nature is doing everything in me. So I can do whatever I want. That's a misuse of the law. Okay? That's what he is going to explain. In fact, these higher truths can only be helpful because only they are true to experience and can be lived on a higher and vaster plane of consciousness. So, when you say that a spiritual man is not bound by morality, that is a correct view, but it is applicable only at the spiritual level. At the social level and the moral level, it is not. Okay, you can't do what you want. Okay, so next sentence. To view these truths from below is to missee, misunderstand, and probably to misuse them. So I gave you an example just now. The spiritual law says what you think is good is not necessarily good, and what you think is bad is not necessarily bad. Okay? We know that very well. For instance, you may think that illness is very bad. Okay? And it is valid at our level. At a normal human level, illness is bad, okay? Murdering is bad, okay? All these things are bad. But when you go to spiritual level, illness can be a help for the soul. It may teach you to conquer your defects. Okay? So, what is pleasant for the normal man may not be very pleasant for the soul. It may actually be a hindrance. Your pleasure has to be contained. So, the body-mind life enjoys good food, okay, good wealth, good clothes. But when you go to spiritual level, you have to control all these enjoyments in a vital way. Enjoyment in a spiritual way is fine, but you can't enjoy all these things with a negative and a egoistic manner. So there it is different. So different laws apply for different people. That's what I'm saying. Now, to missee, to misunderstand and probably to misuse. That is the reason why the Gita says, don't teach spiritual truths to those who are not ready. Obviously, that is quite correct. Yeah? So, it is a higher truth that the distinction of good and evil is indeed a practical fact and law valid for the egoistic human life, which is at the stage of transition from the animal to the divine. But on a higher plane, we rise beyond good and evil, are above their duality, even as the Godhead is above it. Okay? So, this is a very important truth to keep in mind, that at each level of consciousness, the laws go on changing, and they are not necessarily valid for the other planes of consciousness. The best example we can give of that is at the animal level, there is no morality. At the life level, there is no morality. The animal can kill another one very easily and even eat it up alive. Okay? But man can't do that. He has to come, because that's a mental stage. So these are the truths. So when you say that spiritual truths are to be applied only at that level and not below, that is what the Gita is saying. So for the spiritual man, doing good and doing bad don't apply. Just remember Arjuna's case. He is being told to kill his enemies. Now morality says you can't kill anybody. So that which is moral is not necessarily true at the higher level. Okay. So Sremda had to do his best. He had to do his best to eliminate Hitler. Yes, tell me. Somebody.
So a spiritual man, for him to live in a society which is not spiritual, would be very difficult for him and for the others, no?
That is the reason why spiritual people usually used to go away from society.
Yes.
That's one of the reasons.
Yes.
Yeah, you're quite right. They used to go away, that's why, to the cave and the forest and live separately. Yes, quite right. That's right. So, this is what Sandhya is saying. To view these truths from below is to missee, misunderstand and probably misuse. Misuse is very interesting. A man who is accused of murder, okay, in the court, he may claim that the spiritual law says that I am not free to do what I want. I don't have a choice. I do what nature tells me to do. So if nature is telling me to kill this man, I have killed him. So how am I responsible? I am not responsible. Now, there is a certain amount of truth in this, but that does not give him the right to misuse the law. That's exactly the point. You know, once long ago, in a French court, okay, there was a judgment that says that a man who was a serial killer, the doctors tested him and found that he has an abnormality in his genes. Okay, so they found. Normally, the sex ratio is determined by Those who are doctors probably know this. I'm giving you, I may not be very accurate in what I'm saying, but the truth behind what I'm saying is there. Okay, there are chromosomes and all that, and the sex ratio is decided by, say, X and Y. So if there are two X's and a Y, then you are a female. But if you have one X and two Y's, then you are a man. So they found an abnormality in this man, and he was not given total punishment. They tried to reform him. So there is a truth in this, that the body-mind life is not free. But that doesn't mean you can misuse the law. That's the thing.
Ranga, in a spiritual man, it's the divine who tells him to do things, not the nature, no?
No, divine does not do directly. Divine does everything through nature. At the spiritual level, at the human level, it is nature that is doing everything, and that is quite acceptable to the divine, because the divine himself has made the law. He says, I will not directly act in the physical world, but I will act through nature. Now, remember that story to illustrate this truth. God does not intervene directly in the physical world. He does it through nature. You remember the story about the man drowning in the sea? So this man thinks that God is going to come and save him. He's got faith. So a ship comes and says, oh, you are drowning, come, we'll rescue you. He says, no, don't worry. God is going to come and rescue me. Okay? Then another ship comes, same thing happens. Another ship comes, this man refuses. He says, God is going to save me. Then he drowns. And when he goes to heaven, he tells God, I believed in you and I thought that you were going to save me. What happened? Why did you come and save me? God says to him, 4 times I came to save you. Okay? So this is the truth that you must remember. God does not act directly. Gita says that very clearly also. God does not interfere at the spiritual level, at the physical level. He does the work through nature. Every time that yes, tell me.
That misuse of this different laws for different levels. There is an example which of this place itself. You must be knowing about that case when the suicide case about the 5 sisters. In the court, they had put up this thing about Vishwabandhuda. That Vishwabandhuda and Tarladi, they both are ashramites. They were asked, Dilipda was there, he was in that witness, this thing that they are examined. So he was asked that these 2 people are ashramites. So he said yes. Then, and they were ashramites since when? That was questioned. And then the judge asked, they have a daughter? So he said yes. Then they told, then how do you apply this for these whoever are accused that they were wrong and that's why they were removed from the ashram? So in that, Dilipda told that mother was there. It was in the time of the mother. And she is the divine. Whatever she gave, what permission she gave or she did not get, we mere humans cannot decide, cannot comment on that but we have to follow the rules which are set for an institution as social laws. So we took our decision based on that. When we were discussing this, suddenly this incident came into my mind. So, and the judge accepted this explanation, like whatever the other things I don't know, but this incident I remember. It was narrated to me by Dilipda once. So I just remembered this, that yes, how it can be misused and how it should be used actually.
That's right. Okay. So that's what the Gita is saying, that you should not misuse the laws of the higher world in the lower world. Okay, so I read the next sentence. It is a higher truth that the distinction of good and evil is indeed a practical fact and law valid for the egoistic human life, which is the stage of transition from the animal to the divine. But on a higher plane, we rise beyond good and evil, or above their duality, even as the Godhead is above it. So, how to explain how morality is not valid at the spiritual level? Okay, I usually give one example from which you can extend the example to understand how good and evil cannot be valid at the spiritual level. Because when you are in your normal egoistic consciousness, you are subject to dualities. You are seeing good and bad. You are seeing that which is harmful to you and that which is not harmful to you. So, this is all. But when you go to the higher level, then it becomes invalid. Why? Because, let's take one example. Take the example of a very, very easy. Take the example of a wind, okay, the air, which is blowing at a certain speed. Suppose the speed is very, very low and pleasant, like you are sitting on the sea beach and a very pleasant wind is coming. You call it, oh, so pleasant, it is good, it's very nice. But that same wind, when it becomes 200 kilometers per hour, it becomes a storm and a cyclone, and you don't like it and you say it is bad, it is destroying trees, it is destroying houses, this is bad. But when you go to the higher level of consciousness, you don't see the effects. You see only the air which is moving slow and moving fast. So, there's good and bad disappear there. You are seeing only the wind acting in a certain way. Okay? So, this example makes us understand how in the spiritual world you start seeing oneness of things and not the dualities. The dualities are the results, good and bad. You don't see that. You see only the one principle which is behind both. This is one example by which one can understand how the good and bad morality disappears at the spiritual level. You start seeing the oneness of things. Okay? So, this is what Shendra is saying here. On the lower plane, good and bad exist. Okay? And you have to conquer that. But when you go to the high, and how is that? Because it helps you to rise high. If evil is not there, you will not make an effort to go up. But if evil is there, you will make an effort to go up. So evil and dualities are very useful and good at the lower level. But when you go to the higher level, their usefulness disappears and therefore they are of no use to you. You reject the dualities. Okay? That's exactly what is being said. But the unripe mind, seizing on this truth without rising from the lower consciousness, where it is not practically valid, will simply make it a convenient excuse for indulging its asuric propensities. This is exactly what we discussed just now. A man who has killed somebody can argue by using the law of the higher plane and applying it in the lower, which is a misuse. Okay? What can I do? I am built like that. Okay? Many people say that. Okay? I know there was one of my colleagues, I had told him that you have a good deal of ego. Of course, I didn't tell him in blank terms, but we had discussed a particular question, and I said that you have a lot of arrogance. So he said, I know that, but I can do nothing about it. So that is a misapplication. Okay? So you don't make an effort to correct yourself. And if you don't make an effort to correct yourself, you will remain at the same level. But if you are conscious that there is evil and good, and you make an effort to correct yourself, then naturally you will benefit. So dualities are good at the lower level. Dualities, usefulness disappears at the higher level, and therefore they are not valid anymore. Okay? But the unripe mind, seizing on this truth without rising from the lower consciousness, where it is not practically valid, will simply make it a convenient excuse for indulging its asuric propensities, denying the distinction between good and evil altogether, and falling by self-indulgence deeper into the morass of perdition. Sarvajnana vimudan nashtan achetasa. So, you will go from bad to worse and finally worst. Okay? So, that is what has to be avoided, and that is why the concept of good and evil at the lower level is valid, and you have to stick to the law. So too with this truth of the determinism of nature. Okay? So, it is true that there is determinism of nature at the body-mind-life level, but the soul can rise to a higher level, and there the determinism of nature disappears. Okay? That is the reason why it's called liberation. When your soul is identified with body-mind-life, it is imprisoned. It is not free. It has to obey the laws of nature. Okay? Nature tells the mind what to do. Nature tells the life what to do. Nature tells the body what to do. It is nature which is operating at a universal level and entering into the individual and telling him, this is what you have to do, and you do it, and you think that you are doing because you have an ego. Okay? So, if you do that, this will happen. You will go from bad to worse, and finally, nashtan. You will be ruined. He is talking about the soul, not the outer. So the nashtan, the soul will go down from bad to worse. So too with this truth of the determinism of nature. It will be misseen and misused as those misuse it who declare that a man is what his nature has made him and cannot do otherwise than as his nature compels him. It is true in a sense, but not in the sense which is attached to it. Okay? Not in the sense that the ego self can claim irresponsibility and immunity. The law is true, but that doesn't mean to say that I can do what I want. Misuse of the law for itself endeavors. For it has a will and it has desire. And so long as it acts according to its will and desire, even though that be its nature, it must bear the reactions of its karma. So, when you do something, there will be an effect. And therefore, you have to take into account morality. It is a net. It is in a net, if you will, a snare which may well seem perplexing, illogical, unjust, terrible to its present experience, to its limited self-knowledge, but a snare of its own choice, a net of its own weaving. Now, this is interesting, because you may say, oh, God has made everything, you are imprisoned. That's very unfair. Why should the soul be put into a prison? That's very unfair. But the soul, remember, is coming down from God and entering into the inconscience. And these laws are helping you to go up. Okay? That's why they are valid at that level. This is a discussion. A very interesting discussion and very subtle, but we have to understand this truth. Okay? So now, we can read the next one. The Gita says indeed. So, one of you has to read. Who has to read? Pallavi, you read?
Yes, Ranga, I'll read.
Okay, go ahead. The Gita. The Gita says.
The Gita says, indeed, all existence follow their nature and what shall forcing it away. Which seems, if we take it by itself, a hopelessly absolute assertion of the importance of nature over the soul. Even the man of knowledge acts according to his own nature. And on this it founds the injunction to follow faithfully in our action the law of our nature. Better is one's own law of works, swadharma, though in itself false, an alien law well wrought out. Death in one's law of being is better, perilous is to follow.
Your
But
internet is...
yeah, I think so. What is precisely meant by this furthermore, we have to wait to see until we get to the more elaborate disquisition in the closing chapters about Purusha and Prakriti and the gunas. But certainly it does not mean that we are to follow any impulse, even though evil, which we call our nature, dictates to us. For between these two verses of Gita throws in this further injunction. In the object of this or that sense, liking and disliking are set in ambush. fall not into their power, for they are the besetters of the soul in its path. And immediately after this, in answer to Arjuna's objection, asks him if there is no fault in following our nature, what are we then to say if that in us which drives a man to sin, as if by force, even against his own struggling will? The teacher replies that this is desire and its companion wrath, children of Rajas, the second guna, the principle of passion. This desire is the soul's great enemy and has to be slain. Abstention from evil doing it declares to be the first condition for liberation. And always it joins self-mastery, self-control, samyama, control of the mind, senses, all the lower being.
So, this complicated question is being discussed further, and the Gita says indeed, all existences follow their nature, and what shall coercing it avail? Okay, so this is the chapter 3, verse 33. Okay. There is a verse 33 goes, Sadrisham cheshtate swasya Prakriti jnanavanapi. Even the one who is wise, he only follows his own nature. Sadrisham cheshtate swasya Prakriti jnanavanapi. Prakritim yanti bhutani nigraha kim karishyati. So, Prakritim yanti bhutani. All creatures follow their own nature. Okay. So what can coercing do it? That's what you say. Okay. So that's a truth at a higher level. Okay. So, all existence follow their nature, and what shall coercing it avail? Which seems, if we take it by itself, note that, you must never take something, a statement by itself. You must always see above and below and around what is there. Then only the truth will come out. Okay. So, if you take it by itself, a hopelessly absolute assertion of the omnipotence of nature over the soul. So is that true? It's true only at the lower level when you yourself, your own self has identified itself with body, mind, life. Okay? And that's it. It has to come out of it. So you yourself have created this situation. It's not God that who has imposed this law on you. Okay? So even the man of knowledge acts according to his own nature. And on this it founds the injunction to follow faithfully in our own action the law of our nature. Better is one's own law of works, swadharma, though in itself faulty, than an alien law well wrought out. Death in one's own law of being is better. Perilous it is to follow an alien law. So you must be true to yourself. Okay? That is the important thing. Okay? I remember in a very general way I can say this. Okay? So, mother did not like milk because it didn't agree with her. But she gave each sadhak 3/4 of a liter in the dining hall. That was the standard. Okay? 250 ml per meal. Now, she didn't herself like it. So somebody can argue, oh, mother does not like milk and she cannot take, so I also won't take. Okay? That's a misuse of the law. So, you have to be very, very careful and not misuse this law. At your level, you can take it. Okay? So, then it is saying, better to follow faithfully. This can be a little confusing. Then, just as a nature, you have to follow your nature, but that doesn't mean to say that that's the whole truth. There is a soul. Your nature is there, but there is also the soul. And the soul also has a say in this matter. So long as you are under the domination of body, mind, life and universal nature, yes, you do follow your own nature's law. Okay, that's correct. But what about the soul? You can't say the soul doesn't exist. Okay, the soul does exist and does influence the entire. It has a say in the matter. So that changes the situation completely. The soul has got the right to freedom. The body-mind life does not. And this truth is applicable even for avatars. By the way, when a yogi gets his soul to not make identification with the body-mind life and comes out, he is free. He becomes a rishi. But the body-mind life is continuing to apply its own laws. Remember Durvasa, okay? Then it becomes clear. He is a realized soul, but he used to get very angry, okay? And his lower nature is not changed at all, okay? To some extent it may change, but not fully. Remember that, okay? So, this is what integral yoga makes a difference. He says if your soul is free and your body-mind life is not free, then the world remains absolutely in ignorance and falsehood. So why should we allow that? So that's why he brings in the integral yoga and says that liberation, spiritual liberation, is only the first step. The second step is to make even the imperfections of the lower world, that also has to disappear. That is Srivada's contribution. Okay? So, this you can't say that the soul doesn't exist. That also is the same. So, the Gita's, I remind you about the Gita's 3 levels. Ksharapurusha, level at our level, the mutable consciousness. It's constantly moving and it is subject to ignorance and egoism and imperfection. But when you go to the spiritual level of consciousness, the soul is free. Okay? The soul is completely now devoid of all imperfection and ignorance and ego. There is no ego in the soul who is free. There is no imperfection. Relatively speaking, the soul is free. But the body-mind life is not. Okay? So, what can you do? You have to go to the third level. From the Ksharapurusha, you have to go to the Aksharapurusha, the immutable soul, the spiritual planes of consciousness. And finally, if you want to change the lower, you have to go to the third level, the Purushottama level. Uttama Purusha. Ksharapurusha, imperfection, egoism and ignorance. Aksharapurusha, no ignorance, no imperfection and no egoism. But also no power to change the lower. So if you get the power to change the lower, go to the Uttama Purusha. You reverse the Uttama Purusha and make it Purushottama. There you have the power to change, and that is the reason why Srivada wants the Uttama Purusha consciousness. Then you can change the lower. Okay? So this is the truth of the parallel we are reading. So too with the truth of the determinism of nature. So it will be misseen and misused as those misuse it who declare that a man is what his nature has made him and cannot do otherwise than as his nature compels him. It is true in a sense, but not in the sense which is attached to it, not in the sense that the ego self can claim irresponsibility and impunity for itself in its works. For it has a will and it has desire. And so long as it acts according to its will and desire, even though that be its nature, it must bear the reactions of its karma. Okay? It's a net, if you will, a snare, which may well seem perplexing, illogical, unjust, terrible to its present experience, to its limited self-knowledge, but a snare of its own choice, a net of its own weaving. It's not a law imposed on you. You yourself have decided to come down.
Ranga,
yeah. I'm reading from the previous.
yes.
Yeah. I understand. I get carried away sometimes. Okay, so what is the time? 35. We've got 5 minutes. We have read the para, so I will quickly go through it. So now he's talking of Swadharma and Swabhava. Okay. So Swadharma and Swabhava, nature. So this is a very interesting thing what Gita says. Even if your own Swadharma, your works are imperfect, it is better to do remain in your own swabhava rather than the swabhava of somebody else. Okay, not swabhava but other existence. Okay, swabhava is your own, but it is better not to do something else because even death is preferable there, it says. Okay, and that's a very interesting thing, it says. Shreyan swadharmo viguna, without qualities, okay? Paradharma anusthita. Swadharme nidhanam shreya. Okay? Paradharma bhayavaha. So, better to stick to your own dharma than to stick to somebody else's dharma. That's what is being said. But this you have to understand very, it does not refer to be your being a doctor or an engineer. Huh? That's not your swadharma. Okay? It's the soul that comes into the picture. So, then, I read the next sentence. For between these two verses, the Gita throws in this further injection. In the object of this or that sense, liking and disliking are set in ambush. Fall not into their power, for they are the besetters of the soul in its path. Okay? And immediately after this, in answer to Arjuna's objection, who asks him, if there is no fault in following our own nature, what are we then to say of that in us which drives a man to sin as if by force, even against his own struggling will? The teacher replies that this is desire and its companion wrath, children of Rajas, the second guna, the principle of passion. And this desire is the soul's great enemy and has to be slain. This is the answer that the Gita gives. Abstention from evil doing, it declares to be the first condition of liberation. And always it enjoins self-mastery, self-control, samyama, control. Control of the mind, senses and all the lower being. Now, a man who says that I can do only what my nature is telling me to do, so why should I not enjoy myself? But then you will also bear the consequences of your wrong actions, and then you cannot complain. Okay? If you are accepting pleasure, then you have to also accept the consequences of your wrong actions. That's the whole thing. Okay? So, then he is saying, simply saying one thing which is in a later chapter. What is precisely meant by Swadharma, we have to wait to see until we get to the more elaborate disquisition. Disquisition is a long and complex discourse in the closing chapters about Purusha and Prakriti. So in great detail, we will discuss this, the Purusha and the Prakriti, the nature, body, mind, life and the soul. We can't only think of only one. We have to think of a combination of both. That is what will throw more light on this issue of the determinism of nature. How valid it is. Because remember that your soul can have freedom. The soul can have freedom. So this truth that nature is making you do everything, it is largely true only at the physical level. At the other levels, the law becomes slowly more and more lax, okay? More and more inapplicable. Just like this law is available even at the physical level. Okay? Remember, gravitational pull is absolute in this physical world. But the yogi, if he rises to a higher consciousness, that law does not apply to him. He can levitate. So, depending at the level of consciousness you are, their laws will go on changing. Okay? Even physically, when I rise higher and higher in physical space, the gravitation becomes less and less. And when you go 100 miles above the earth, then gravitation disappears. So, this is one example, also very interesting example of how to see the laws. The laws of gravitation are absolutely irreversible in the lowest planes of the earth, on the surface of the earth. As you keep going up higher and higher, even the physical laws change. So how much more the spiritual laws will change? Absolutely. That is the thing to be discussed. And that we will discuss between Purusha and Prakriti. There is later chapters. He says it will be kept for later, closing chapters. Okay? So, it's very interesting and we have to understand very, very subtly the truth of this, what he said. So we stop here today. It's already 8:41. I'm sorry I digressed a little from the paragraph that we had to read today. I went on into the other paragraph. They are all related subjects, but that's why it happened. So, next time we'll take up from, there is therefore a distinction to be made. Okay? Au revoir everybody. Have a nice day.
Guru
Thank you,
Ranga.
Ranga.
Okay.